Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Mastering Retention podcast. Today is actually part two of our monetization series with Rimmy. So, welcome back to everyone that didn't hear part one. If you haven't, you should go listen to that one right now because we think it gives you a really good layout of monetization as a whole as you kind of think about it. But obviously, making enough money to continue to support your games, to pay salaries, to keep the lights on is super important so that we can continue to do what we do, which is make games. But it's a very big subject. There's a lot to cover, a lot of different strategies and things like that. So really excited for part two, which is going to be all about kind of the idea of first time payer conversion. How do you actually get people to spend money the first time in your game? Interestingly enough, psychologically, it's a lot easier to get them to spend money again once you get them to spend it the first time. But making that first purchase, that first commitment is super challenging. So Remy, I'm excited to delve into this topic with you. So let's go ahead and do that. So when I'm talking about monetization, a first time conversion, what does that actually mean, like for people that are listening?
Yeah, and conversion is one of those just fantastic industry words that we use in 7 different places, which is just the best. So for the context of this discussion, you are converting a non-paying player into a paying player. So I think philosophically, the thing to remember is that especially in North America, very, very few people are coming to your game with the intention of paying. Like they are coming to get free great content, and you're basically, your entire job is to convince them that your game is so good, so fun, and so rewarding that's actually in their best interest to spend on a free product. So that's why conversion is such a challenge and so fundamentally important to us.
I like that. Why does first time conversion actually matter? Like, why should I care about this subject and why should I keep listening to the rest of this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on one of the easy answers to that, which is that, yeah, people are vastly more likely to spend multiple times after spending the first time. They essentially kind of like, you break that wall down and then they're invested. They're literally monetarily invested. They have the kind of sunk cost fallacy, which is actually really helpful, which is like they're more likely to continue to play your game because they've spent money on it. So they've actually made themselves more likely to be retained. And yeah, it's pretty easy like that. For some reason, that that question of is this game worth $1 is actually a harder question for a person to answer than is this game worth $100 later, like once they've convinced themselves. So why is that conversion so important? It's like, one, as mentioned, it's the hardest thing you can do is convince someone to spend money on something free. But yeah, it really does break down the doors for everything that's going to come after. And if you're not intentional about it, it's not something to ever underestimate. Like you can almost underestimate every monetization point after that, which is just, oh, we'll just keep showing them bundles and sales and all that stuff is good. But if you're not hyper intentional and specific about what you're trying to do to set up an optimal first purchase flow, you're not just stopping one purchase. Keep in mind, you're stopping every purchase that person might have made down the road.
Super interesting. So you mentioned that you can actually increase retention by getting people to spend money. How big of an increase are we talking about here? Like, obviously, every game is probably a little bit different, but like, have you personally seen, okay, once a payer spends money, their retention for, let's say, day 30 goes up, 20% for that segment or something like that?
It's really tough. That's kind of a there's too many confounding variables there, right? Because like the kind of person who's willing to spend is far more likely to be the kind of person that would have played your game longer anyway. So if you compare a spending user to the average user, yes, you'll probably see a pretty high difference in retention. But frankly, you would have seen a comparable difference if you just had that non-paying user be that hardcore invested in your product anyway. So it's really difficult to put numbers behind it. It is more to say that, yeah, the kind of person who spends is virtually guaranteed to play your game a lot more and a lot longer. But yeah, I could never divorce it entirely from they're also the biggest fans of your game.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So I hear, conversion or convert a lot. we just defined first time conversion. What's the primary difference between that like first time conversion event and subsequent conversion events, or repurchase, I guess you might call it?
Sorry, do you mean from like the player's perspective or for the way we look at it? What are you thinking?
Either, or maybe both. I think it's always good to put ourselves in our players' shoes when we can.
Yeah, I'd say so from the player standpoint, I think it's actually different ways of looking at the game. And you know what? Actually, I'll spread that. I think we have to have that same lens. So there is a different likelihood for what a person is likely going to purchase the first time versus the second or the third. And I like to talk about the difference between, impulse buys and strategic purchases. And I actually did think of a bit of an example that I will henceforth use all the time to demonstrate the difference. So when you see a vanity purchase in Fortnite, to some extent that falls into the impulse category. But if you see like a mid-core RPG, they might try to sell you like a gem that goes inside a piece of equipment that your character uses that has 3 stat effects. And I think the difference is really, really clear there. So one of the reasons vanity in a game that does vanity well, which is a slightly different conversation, tends to be such a great converter or something that people are willing to spend so much money on, is because you need to know nothing about the game. If I show you a stormtrooper, you like stormtroopers, you might buy a stormtrooper. You didn't even need to know what game I'm talking about to know that probably applies. But the amount of information a person needs to understand that they're making a good strategic purchase is extraordinary by comparison. So again, an equipment slot, like not even a piece of equipment, but a lot of games will be like, this is your blue ruby that adds +7 to strength that only can be equipped into chest pieces of armor. Like there's like 7 obfuscations before a player understands how it's going to pay off. They have to have the armor, know how important that is. They have to know how important the secondary system is. They have to be actively doing it. They're probably going to be thinking about like obsolescence, like how long is this good for? So the important thing to remember, and I think it really does come up on a day-to-day basis, is the first time someone purchases something, they're probably going to have the smallest amount of total potential education to your game compared to any subsequent purchase. So it has to be something that you put effort into teaching them. It has to be something they understand the value of, and ideally the simpler the better. Because later on, these bigger purchases, these more sustainable purchases, tend to be ones that are driven by a greater, broader understanding of the game. When you play like a game before Fire Age, like so many of their purchases down the line are like specifically supposed to be layered with this on top of 6 other buffs at the exact same time, and there's the most efficient spend versus payoff. Like that's for your hardcore players, and those are the kind of reconversion points you want to slowly try to ideally give them more expensive things that they're willing to spend on. But the biggest distinction is always like early on, you need the simplest, best purchase a player could make, and you want them to understand that purchase as quickly as you possibly can.
That's super interesting. So thinking about first time conversion a little bit, and I am generally, with the very few exceptions of some games that I usually go into with like a lot of knowledge and past experience with, I'm generally not going to convert until I've played a game for like a year or 2.
Oh, wow. Support
like
your industry.
I gotta be dedicated. But then I become a whale. Sure. and it's changed a little bit with Battle Pass and things like that. I basically have to be like super engaged with the game, because I feel like I play so many games that I just churn through most of them, and there's only like a few that actually stick around. And once I've stuck around it for a long enough time, I'm like, wow, I really enjoy this game. Oh, here's something that's actually valuable. To my question, okay, so you talked about the importance of having like a very clear first time conversion event. My favorite one that I've ever seen is in Game of Thrones Conquest. And they blend it with psychological stuff that I won't go into right now. But basically, after you complete the first time user experience, you're hit with a pop-up where they gift you your very own dragon egg. It's awesome. Everyone that's playing Game of Thrones wants their own dragon, right? It's
Yep.
Part of it. And then immediately they hit you with an offer. And if you really look at the offer and you dig into it, they're giving you like 1,000 wood or something like that, and maybe a couple of other things to try to get you to convert later. But the offer says hatch your dragon. And it's like, okay, I got my dragon. Yeah, I want to hatch it. Like, I want to do that right now because I want my dragon. I'm playing Game of Thrones. And I think that probably converts extremely well. But for the players that are like, well, I'm not going to drop $5 on this game right away, and they close out of that offer, and they've now been playing this game for, I don't know, days, weeks, months, whatever it is. Do you think it makes sense to try to use some sort of segmentation to again still focus in on that first time conversion event? Whereas I had first time conversion, optimized for the new players that are coming in with that Hatch Your Dragon event. But then I've got this, second or maybe third layer of first time conversion kind of designed offers and things later on in the game. Now that I know the player knows what that gem is used for, they know how valuable it is, they actually want it. You know, is that something that I should be thinking for and actually planning and designing within my whole idea of first time payer conversion?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching on a couple of things here. So, so one, I'll relate back to what I just said using your example, because I think it's a great example. As you said, if you just said, there's a game that wanted me to pay to hatch my dragon, you didn't even need to mention what game it was or what the context was or anything. Yeah, I want a dragon, right? That's the beginning and the ending of the value of that. And it's why it's a good converter pack, because again, the education and the what you have to teach a player to understand is minimal to none. Like you add that it's Game of Thrones, cool, exponentially I want my dragon even more. But the point is that you have mentioned a very, very clear goal for a player and a very clear outcome that takes as little education as possible. So now looking at the other side, you're also doing the other side of good monetization, which is creating a need. And that's a thing that needs to be understood is you don't need vanity. That's one of the tricky parts for it. You want vanity, and I'd say some games actually do intentionally lead into it, like where you look like garbage until basically you make a purchase. I think it's actually been a sad bit of a trend I've seen in a lot of games lately that have been leading into vanity, is a lot of the core models are subpar. But yeah, for a strategic purchase, that need has to be created with a lot of intention, and it's why segmentation tends to work really well, because you can't always with perfect clarity guarantee that a person is going to have a need for, say, a specific currency at a specific time, though certain games do it better than others. So going into like, would you want different conversion packs? Absolutely. Your conversion pack, the thing, frankly, any monetization, but conversion even more importantly, it's supposed to be satisfying your biggest, most exciting, most easy to understand need at any given time. And your need is going to be different a year into play or a week into play than it was in your first day. So yeah, fundamentally, you should be planning that, like in an ideal scenario, your game always knows where your player is and can always provide, like dynamic systems are kind of like that dream state where it's like, I'm going to generate a bundle that's going to look at this player's account, see that they don't have enough wood and that they need it to progress. And I'm going to make them a bundle on the fly that says, here's your wood bundle. And it comes with some other best practice stuff on top of it. So yeah, so any kind of purchase, ideally it's you are creating a very specific catered need that a player is going to run into. And then you're basically satisfying that need in the easiest, clearest way possible. Because again, you want the smallest number of steps. I need wood. Here's your wood. That's always going to be the most effective way that you can provide spend opportunities.
I like that a lot. So, but of people that are listening, we just talked about segmentation and maybe like multiple different offers and things like that. Like, how much is this actually worth in terms of, if I'm going to have one person that is like completely dedicated to just trying to create these offers and understand the different segments and create the, different first time pair, like, is it actually worth doing, or, is it not worth doing until my game hits some certain level of scale or something like that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So one, I say that the first thing that matters to justify like that role, and I'll be honest, we're hiring for that role. So hey, submit resumes today. Um, but yeah, the thing I would say is like the first thing that needs to be true for that to be worth anyone's time is your game actually has to have the depth and complexity enough to justify it. If you're basically selling a game with just energy, and just as a terrible example, then there'd be no point in getting a person whose full-time job was being like, I'm going to offer 73 energy at this price point to this person. Like maybe they'd get some gains if you had an absurdly large user base, but realistically, it's for it really ties very well to how much variety there is in your purchases. So if you actually have like that's why, I mean, we're hovering around um like 4x games, because they have 600 things you can buy. So if there's 600 things you could buy, yeah, you could try to keep this as like a side of your desk thing where you're just like, all right, I wonder if this combination of those 600 is effective, or I'm going to unlock at these points, or I know someone's going to have to buy a upgrade, so I assume they'll have that thing. But frankly, like, that is a full-time job to figure out all the right answers of, no, you want this person at this stage to get this exact offer because, and you want to have segment your player base 300 different ways, and you want to be off giving optimal offers. It really does tie to like the diversity of purchases that a player can make. And then it's a lot of like, how good is the person at that job? How big is your user base? Like, if you're trying to segment like a 50K DAU, you're probably already in the wrong space. But yeah, largely I'd say it's tied to how complex your game and how much diversity of spend you have.
Like that. That's great. Okay. So I'm sure that this varies a lot game to game, but what percent of players should convert ever? And do you find that that's different between countries like the US versus India, between different segments and between different like player behavior groups?
Yes, absolutely, kind of to all of the above. So it is going to be different by country, by demographic, by geographic. We found that India is now famously building this massive mobile market, but they tend to be an ad-driven economy, so their conversion is going to be drastically lower than probably anyone else you could point at. And yeah, China and Japan tend to have completely different methodologies behind spend as well. Like, it's actually where a lot of our culture is kind of towards like, look how much money I can save. I've heard tell that, in China, it could be the opposite, where people are, no, they want to show off that they are the big spender, or that they're in a different spend bracket than other people. So it can vary wildly. It also, in my mind, kind of more importantly, varies by genre. So different genres are going to have vastly different conversion rates. The number that you tend to hear tossed around is 1 to 3%. Some people have said 1 to 4. When we had better UA targeting, a paid user might have as high as 5%, and that was pretty great. But the more important than the number itself, the thing that I would focus on if someone here is trying to learn lessons about monetization, learning that it's a numbers game, and I like to use 1% as the reference number for this exact reason, is you always have to try to do that math in your head when you're trying to figure out whether or not you're building something that's good to monetize. Remember that 1 in 100 people who see this might spend money on it. So if you have something that say, oh, well, we put an offer in our store. Okay, cool. What percentage of your players actually go to your store per day? Maybe it's only 20%. So, okay, that means that 1 in 100 is now actually 1/100th of 20% of your player base. So you've actually already drastically cut. So that's the biggest lesson I like to encourage people, is like, you want, in an ideal world, 100% of your user base is exposed to 100% of your monetization opportunities, because only then will you get that true 1%. Otherwise, you're literally just cutting yourself off over and over and over until it's a percentage of a percentage.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I know I've seen with some, like rewarded video monetization, they're like, well, we'll add rewarded videos into our level mechanic, and once you're out of lives, you can watch a video to get another life. I'm like, well, that's cool, but how many people play a level in a day? How many people play enough levels per day that they're going to run out of lives? Oh, we're down to like 20%. And then how many people watch a video beyond that versus just ending your session or whatnot? Yep. So, you just cut it way down. So that's great. So 1 to 5% on the good side, that doesn't sound that awesome. So why is conversion so difficult?
Again, it is selling. You're selling something to someone who's getting your product for free. So I mean, for one thing, I'd say it's why that the player bases are so enormous for a successful mobile game compared to a successful console game. Because yeah, I mean, if you sell 1 million copies of a game. It's actually a pretty enormous achievement. If you have like less than 1 million people ever play your mobile game, you probably just have an unsuccessful mobile game. Because yeah, you're looking at a different percentage of the people who are going to pay. So remembering that, if you have 100 times the user base of a console game, you're actually looking at comparable payers, which is an interesting thing to look at. But yeah, in terms of why it's hard, it is because I think it just comes back to the same thing you're gonna hear me say 1,000 times. It is because you're trying to sell something that is free, and people aren't looking for the next big thing to spend money on. Your entire job is to convince them that your product is worth spending money on. Because again, once you break down that barrier, it's broken forever, and a lot of people are so much more likely to continue to spend if you convince them that your game is that good, which goes more into the how do you make spending feel good conversation. But yeah, it's the biggest challenge you'll probably ever deal with if you have a fun game.
Yeah. So, if I'm thinking about conversion and kind of designing my monetization strategy, what kind of monetization strategy kind of lends itself best to this idea of conversion?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So we can talk about ads. I think we should talk about them a little bit separately. But the thing that I like to encourage people the most is that the thing you should want to monetize on shouldn't be something that is separate to your gameplay. So integrated monetization models, I would say, are almost definitely the path to success. So I'll give that classic loot box comparison, as that tends to be where some people go anyway. If you only open up a loot box when you spend, you're drastically going to reduce the number of people that are willing to spend on loot boxes. But if you teach them, if you open a couple of loot boxes a day and then there is a better one, then again, you've drastically increased people's willingness, because you're trying to build connections to the value of what you're selling. So if you can't establish value within your current gameplay, it's going to be so much harder to convince someone to buy something, because how are they going to judge whether it's worth it? But if they already encounter it, and you can show like an easy way to demonstrate something's even better if you spend, like a bronze chest compared to a gold chest, for instance, or an epic, or whatever scale you want to use. So the thing I would just encourage is, one, it has to be integrated into the gameplay, as mentioned. Two, it should be sustainable / repeatable. That's the thing that's kind of missed. So I'll use your early example. If you only ever had one dragon, that's a terrible monetization model. Why'd you even teach a person that you can get a dragon? Why try to sell it? However, if you got better and better dragons, well, then you could sell someone a monetization point for opening their dragon early a year in, because that egg might take 3 months to hatch, and it might be a legendary dragon, and you can now increase it because it's now a part of your actual loot. So that's one of the more important things to memorize is, yes, to our earlier conversation, you want to provide different conversion points all the way through. But an even better scenario is that they continuously encounter the same type of conversion point that has perceived increased value throughout. So, super simple example, idle miner. It's as you progress into a next level of your mine, it takes like 10 minutes to skip past that timer. Then eventually it takes 30 minutes, then it could take hours conceivably. So you're encountering that same loop as part of your gameplay, but the value of it goes up, because now you're not just spending to get past a 5-minute wait, you're spending to get past maybe a 5-hour wait. And that's not my favorite example, but it's a very clear example of, so yeah, so if you can get those two things, it should be hyper clear, it should be integrated into your gameplay, and it should be a recurring spend point, ideally, just so you're not doing the same work twice and people get used to the value. Every time they encounter that spend point again, they have a better understanding of the value of their purchase.
Yeah. How do you maximize the chances that a player will convert?
I'm not sure if that's necessarily a different answer than I just gave.
Or is that kind of all blended into there a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like almost the thesis of, of our conversation. It's like, yeah, presenting it to them. It's that combination of presenting them the offer, demonstrating the value of them, education, which it's kind of summarizing what we've talked about, but we didn't say it explicitly enough. A lot of your job as a game designer is to teach a player to like certain parts of your game. So for instance, if you're going to sell a consumable, you don't want to sell that consumable first. You want them to use that consumable and be addicted to how much fun it was. Oh, this gives me twice the power, and now I'm zooming through content. Well, now here's your conversion pack, and it gives you 5 of these. That's important to maximize your chances. Educate the player on what's actually fun and valuable in the game. Provide them a chance to use it and experience how much better things can be. Prompt them to purchase something that's probably an even better version of that, and do that at the right time. So if you can combine those, and ideally, again, that's a recurring behavior, you're probably best set up for success with converting players.
So, do you ever think that blending a little bit of psychology in there could help? So as an example, let's say I want to hit you with a very, very valuable offer. This is my Hatch Your Dragon deal. It's like 70, 80% off, really great value for money. Like, you're probably very rarely going to see this thing. For the players that don't spend, does it make sense for maybe the next few days to hit them with like really trashy offers that are like more expensive, less value, and then like on day 7 you like hit them again with an offer that's like the one that disappeared before? And can you create that illusion of like fear of missing out to try to get them to convert the first time? Or is that not worth exploring something like that ever?
There's pros and cons to what you described. So what I will say is, yes, fundamentally psychology is really heavily involved, and I'll use maybe some simpler examples and I'll come back to your direct question. So and again, it's why I tell people to go to Walmart and do all these different things. So price anchoring is going to be one of the most important things you'll ever do. And I'll always use this nice fake example. If I said to you, how much is a magic sword worth in a game? It's impossible for you to have an answer off the cuff, right? So everything you have to add to that is context. So for one thing, you may have external context. Maybe you bought a magic sword in other games and it was $2. So it's gonna make you less likely to spend 5 in this other game. But fundamentally, you want to try to create those relationships in your game. And this is going to apply in a lot of different ways. So if you first get a magic sword and you see its value, and then you sell a better magic sword, you have some intrinsic value tied to it. But that's not going to tell a person whether it should be $2 or $5. However, price anchoring is what's going to do that. So one of the best examples of this is your hard currencies. So virtually every bundle in a game that has hard currency is usually going to sell hard currency plus. And the reason for that is because if I go to my store page and I see that I get maybe 100 hard currency for $5, but the bundle says 100 hard currency for $2 plus these other things, I now believe that it's a good deal. And the funny thing is, it's irrelevant. It's like that value didn't exist until I saw that. But by comparison, I'm able to say this is a more valuable purchase. So that's where a lot of the psychology is going to come up. That's going to rear its head in so many places. One of those most common things you'll see is 3 separate offers, and one offer is crappy, one offer is way too expensive, and then you put a big, delicious best offer symbol on your middle one. It's like, well, if you made it, why would you make 2 bad offers? The answer is because you're trying to push them towards a specific purchase outcome. Geez, I forget what it was called. It's like the psychology of spend or something, but someone made some great
the decoy offers or whatnot.
That's part of it. But yeah, it's basically making a person almost trick themselves. So one of the great examples I heard is like, you're going to the store to buy a bike, and the bike is $100, and all you wanted was that bike. And there's also a helmet next to that bike for $30. And then there's a deal where you get the bike and the helmet for $115. And like they've proven, you're more likely to get that because you're saving $15. But you're not. You're spending $15 you never planned to spend. You came for a bike. You bought a bike and a helmet. You've actually been upselled. You feel like you beat the system and you saved money, but you just ended up buying something you never planned for. So to wrap back to your initial question, in some ways, what you're saying makes sense because it is essentially price anchoring in a lot of ways. It's like, well, here's the best deal, and here's some crappy ones. Now, it can work, but I think it's actually the secondary conditions that make it a little bit dangerous, because after that person misses that first deal, you have no idea if they're going to be here 7 days from now where your next good deal comes up, and you want people to always have an opportunity to spend. And they should never be like, the extreme version of that is people are only waiting till your best sales arrive. And a lot of people have made that mistake. Like, remember the Steam sale? Steam sale did this every single year and now they never do it again. And we're all so sad as a community. It used to be, here's your best offer that's counting down for 12 hours. And they found that no one bought anything until the last day of the sale because you just kept waiting for the thing you might have bought to go on sale for a better price. So it is, yes, you can use psychology to push people in a certain direction, but you have to be very wary that intelligent consumers are going to notice trends and they're going to, first, you might just miss them entirely. They might just stop playing your game, or you might just actually teach them to only buy the cheapest purchase or the least optimal purchase from the developer standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so looping back a little bit, first time conversion, ideal time for players to convert. Like, should I try to get them to just, spend as soon as possible, or is there some sort of like magic moment in my game where it's like, okay, once they've completed this milestone, if I can get them to spend, like, that's the sweet spot? Or is it different game by game?
Actually, a fascinating and highly relevant question these days. So something that hasn't changed, but that we've seen to be true is people are most likely to convert in their first 7 days. So it is very important that you give them the best conversion points you possibly have within that time frame. I mean, there's 1,000 other factors that double down on that. Obviously, your retention is slowly dropping. You're losing people. So if you had 1 in 100 and half of those people have left, now it's 1 in 50. Sorry, it's less. It's 0.5 and anyway, math. Point being, so that was true, and we've kind of known that for a very long time. Like I heard that for the first time in like 2009 or something. But interestingly, lately, people have been diving way harder into that, to the point that like a lot of people think that you should try to get to them to convert in your first session even. And while I don't think necessarily the data has caught up to those assumptions, it's definitely becoming closer, if not best practices, is vastly more common these days. And a couple things probably contribute to that. One, if someone does spend in your first session, and we have kind of established that it is to some extent tied to retention, awesome, that person is vastly more likely to stick around. But there's also this kind of assumption that like with most games, your kind of peak enjoyment from a product tends to be in that early experience. Everything is novel, everything is new. So, imagine you went to a restaurant, but you weren't expected to spend money in the restaurant for 7 days. Really unusual, right? Like, frankly, at 7 days, you're probably less excited by the restaurant than you were your first time. You've had all the meals, you know what to expect. There's no surprises. So you're vastly more likely the first time to come in and be like, cool, I'm trying something new. I'm engaging with something. So there's a lot of logic now that's pushing us to be like, even if you can't convince them to convert, everyone should have that opportunity to convert as early as possible. For one thing, for that numbers game that we talked about, is you're losing players continuously. So the more people that have that opportunity, the higher your chances are. But yeah, really playing off that, hey, you've just opened up a game, and the way that your like kind of mentality is at that point is, I have something new, I've gotten something that I'm looking to have fun with, and I'm given the opportunity to have more fun. But like the longer a person plays, actually the less valuable certain purchases are, because they have a much better understanding. They become that strategic player that's looking for a strategic buy, not an impulse buy. And that might even be one of the easiest ways to look at it, is like day 1, you're selling a chocolate bar. Day 7, you're selling seeds to plant your garden to earn something. And it is a lot easier to justify $1 on a chocolate bar than building a garden in the long term. So a lot of reasons to try to push forward as early as you can, even though, as mentioned, you should have these nice recurring points and accept that it's not going to happen for everybody right away.
Makes sense. So when I do spend, how should that make your players feel after they've actually spent money on the game?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think the answer sounds obvious, but it's extremely important. So as we're talking about, because yeah, I mean, their likelihood of repeat spend is really what you're looking at there. One, I mean, I think there's also like the moral and the more fundamental issue of like, people should feel good about spending money on your game as a rule. Like, you should want to provide that. I think in some ways it's the best counter for people who are nervous about getting into monetization or trying to sell a real product, because a lot of us have that attitude of, no, we want games to be fun. Spending should be fun too for that reason. But really, if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, you want that repeat purchase. And frankly, conversion packs themselves tend to be really low in price. So just having a conversion pack alone is probably not going to be the most beneficial thing to you. It might recoup your user acquisition costs, but it's unlikely to actually be part of where your profit comes from. So what you really want is a repeat spend. You want someone who's going to spend multiple times, multiple opportunities. So then just think about it from that standpoint, is it's not really any different from anything that we would purchase multiple times, right? If you go to a restaurant and you buy a meal, how should you feel leaving that restaurant? Well, you want to feel like you're going to come back. That's the simplest way of looking at it. So it has to be a great experience. The service has to be good. The food has to taste fantastic. There has to be other things you're looking forward to. Like, you're probably not going to want to just have a menu with one thing on it, because people might not want to do that again. So you need to have a diversity of additional things to sell. So yeah, so coming back to more tangible game examples, what should happen after you make your first purchase? The game should be better. You should have progression. Anything that was a limiting factor previously should be less limiting. You should be able to go faster, feel more powerful, feel more competitive. Anything that is a positive indicator of someone enjoying your game should be amplified exponentially after a purchase. And it should also lead into, okay, now that you've had that incredible high for some amount of time, you should see this next purchase on the horizon.
I like that. So is there any way to like validate that actually like occurred? Like, would you consider doing like a segmented survey, like an hour after or a day after or something, to be like, hey, how did that make you feel? What were you trying to get? What did you think you were getting? What did you actually get? Are you satisfied? Would you, buy again? Something like that.
I think qualitative is always interesting. I'll be honest that I tend to drift away from it simply because I don't know, anything that looks statistically significant from a qualitative standpoint is going to be so much more statistically significant from a quantitative standpoint. From the player base, it's going to be inevitably larger. Like, as much as it's great to have 2,000 opinions, if you can even get that, your game is probably going to give you 100,000 opinions in numbers. So qualitative is valuable because it's the only thing that can really surprise you. Numbers can't really surprise you in the same way. Things are only going to go up or down, and it could feel good or bad. Then you have to guess why, whereas a person might be able to tell you why. So that's the way I tend to look for qualitative. But if I was going to try to validate that that things went well, one of the best things I think you can do is be able to filter your dashboards and your data by paying users and actually be able to look at what their behavior is. So easiest one is, do they repeat purchase? Awesome. That's the hardest one to possibly debate. Yeah, they bought again. Clearly it went well. But it's also really important to understand what that experience looked like for them. So did they actually get value? Did you see that they actually kind of like spiked and did something interesting? Like, if you wanted them to have 3 great days, did they actually have 3 great days, or did they blow through it in one day and you actually kind of had some spend exhaustion? There's a lot of things about, kind of to your point, understanding as much as possible what that experience looked like. Also understanding as much as possible what a positive experience looks like in your game. Like, you have to understand that. You have to know that what it feels like to be a paying player. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to kind of control yourself. It's like the second you turn on a cheat in a video game, you'll never quite know anymore. So it's tough for a developer to be like, this is how it feels to spend. But fundamentally, you want to know, like, you may have actually just sold your paying player the worst version of your game. Where I think we talked about this the previous one, like, oh, you bought the conversion pack, congratulations, you've now skipped past that nice, fun, addictive experience and we've dropped you into the grind. So it's really important to just have as much understanding as possible and to know what the best version of your game is. And if you know what the best version is, then that's just what you're trying to sell a player, essentially.
Makes sense. Think about this reconversion event, which is obviously almost even more important than first time. What % of spenders, I guess, in your experience, that made this first purchase actually go on to, reconvert again subsequently? And like, is there like a target where, hey, only 10% of my first time spenders actually go on to buy? Like, is that good? Is that bad? For people that just don't know, like, are there any benchmarks or numbers?
I'll be honest that I actually have a lot less visibility on great benchmarks for this one. I think I'm too narrowly stuck in, like, it's not something I've heard a lot of people talk about versus I hear conversion once a week. So while I can't give you a number, I will tell you honestly that, like, Where conversion, it's the kind of thing that you're supposed to settle for. You're supposed to be like, all right, I know I'll only get a few percent, and that's actually phenomenal because a lot of people get 0%. But repeat purchases, you should genuinely be aiming for 100%. That's actually where you should start looking. And no, you're not going to get that. But frankly, anything lower than that should actually be telling you something about your game. So to our earlier conversation, if your repeat purchase is very low, you have terrible purchases in your game. People didn't actually enjoy spending, or they didn't encounter a second point to spend. So better to know that, okay, we do have all these things, these repeat purchase places. So that's going to remove a bit of the debate. And now if they're not doing it, it's because they didn't actually enjoy spend, or the value of your next purchase is not there or not clear. But really, like if a person spends on your game, they are so much more likely to continue to spend, provided the gameplay stays fun and engaging, and they have continuous series of goals. You should probably call that as a challenge. If only 10% of your people are spending again, it's probably an indicator that spend is not fun in your game, because you want to just be like, where conversion will have a ceiling, repeat spend should almost never have a ceiling in your mind. It's like early retention. You should almost never be satisfied. You should always come back and be like, all right, how can we get those numbers up? What can we do differently? Where are they actually dropping off, and why?
Yeah, interesting. Cool. I guess final piece, is there any target of like how often people should be reconverting, or is it kind of dependent on, the price of the pack? Like some people, oh, I'm going to buy the $99 pack because I know that it's going to last me for, a month or something like that. But are there general targets to like, hey, if my spenders haven't spent any money in the last 2 weeks, I should maybe be concerned and get them something because they might not ever spend again?
Yeah, I think things like battle pass and monthly passes have kind of demonstrated the outside range for this. So I think part of the reason why the dev side likes that so much is because we know trying to get one purchase a month is at least kind of standard, right? Like you'd want it, that's where you'd want to be at the very least. Great, they're going to keep spending. I think it's also strongly tied to retention. Most people are quitting your game after 2 weeks. Then you better be aware of like you have a very small range. If you're playing a supercell game where they're going to be here for years, then it's actually a more deep, rich conversation, because you have to be able to ensure that there is something valuable to be spending on at some cadence, basically for years at a time. So yeah, I think I think I would love to target like a week. I don't think it's reasonable. I think it's a good place to start from a methodology standpoint of like, how many, you can kind of look from a data standpoint. How many sales points have they encountered in a week, and how many do they encounter on average before they're willing to spend? So that you can look at things like that to kind of anchor your thoughts. But frankly, past logic like that, I think it becomes really highly game specific. And it's the kind of thing like we talked briefly about having a person whose full job is devoted to this. Understanding spend fatigue is an extraordinarily important part of your game. So I will say one of the greatest examples in our market that suggests that weekly is reasonable is weekly events. So many games have weekly events now, and people spend almost every time. So we know that a lot of people are willing to spend on a weekly cadence, but you can definitely compromise that if you had events every day, for instance. They probably won't convert or reconvert 7 times in a week. And that might even kind of control or be one of the best indicators for how much event content you want in your games. But yeah, truly understanding like how much time do people need to cool off if you put on a sale or if you have a regular purchase is one. It's a full job. Like that's something people need to be aware of, because that's ultimately going to set a lot of your strategies for trying to get people to spend again.
That's awesome. So we sort of touched on this a little bit, but what kind of presentation actually gets players to convert? Like what sort of messaging is required? What sort of discounts is specifically thinking about this first time conversion event? Like how do I make something, so juicy that everyone wants to buy this?
Yeah. And it's going to combine a lot of the things we've talked about. So for starters, it needs to be visible and understandable. So if you don't pop it up inside the game, if you just have like the timer, or if it just exists in your store, as you talked about, you've already reduced the number of people who are going to see it. But let's start from where you'll actually see it. So, all right, so you put an offer in front of somebody. So what are the most important things? Yes, there's some cool best practices, and we'll go over them in terms of saying sale or percent off or buy one, get whatever the hell that looks like. But more importantly, you need to show someone something they want to buy. And that's why it goes back to education. If you sell them three, let me put it this way, you shouldn't learn anything from a bundle. That is a huge challenge. A bundle or an offer, whatever you want to call it, should show you things you already know and understand. And then the only thing you're thinking about is probably the price point and the value. So the things you want to show a person, one, going back to psychology a little bit, you probably don't want to show them more than 3 things because that's too many things for them to conceptualize. So a lot of people just like, here's our crazy starter bundle, 19 different things. It's like, all right, now if I want to know this is a good deal, I've got to be like, do I want 20 of those? Is 47 of that a good deal? How do I understand what I'm purchasing? Like, if you have that kind of conscientious spender, you don't want them trying to like collate like all the parts of your offer and try to figure out like which is actually good, which is bad, what do I need. You want a few really eye-catching awesome things that a player has been taught. So cool, there's that boost I like. There's a chest and it's platinum. I don't even know, it needs to know anything about the game. I just know a platinum chest is awesome. And there's a big old pile of hard currency. They've already made me spend hard currency 4 times in the Fatui, so I know that's valuable and improves my game. And if I have those 3, then you're only really talking about the best practices, which are the wrapping around that. So things that you might want to see, as we mentioned earlier, seeing multiple packs and having one, that's a powerful tool, but I would kind of avoid it for conversion because you don't really want to give them a choice. Too much choice is actually very bad for people new to a game. They want to feel like they're already looking at the best thing, which is what conversion packs tend to be. So this is the best value, and you probably want to say it. Best value. This is the thing that's going to be, maybe it's 80% off from your core price, or maybe it's bonus. You know, there's debates on which work better. So maybe it's 300% bonus on what your current purchase is. It's going to have a timer because you need to have that FOMO that everyone's aware of. So this offer only available once, or counting down for this amount of time, or both. You want to have a really extremely clear call to action. Sorry, in my early career, I didn't know what CTA was. So call to action, for anyone who hasn't heard the term, the button you're supposed to press has to be extraordinarily clear. And I say this, but I've seen a lot of packages where you're supposed to kind of like click anywhere on the bundle. And it's okay if you can click anywhere on the bundle, as long as there's also a very clear button that says purchase or buy now or whatever, something that draws them down to it. And that has to look great. It has to be the kind of button you just need to push. And then, yeah, you want a price that's perfectly optimized. That's going to be a thing you are guaranteed going to A/B test. Yes, there will probably be other market references that put you in the right ballpark. Other comparable games, maybe they're $2.99, maybe they're $4.99, whatever. That should put you in the range, but you're going to want to find out what is the exact right purchase point for your game. You're also going to want to play with the quantities of the things you're selling, because that's also going to be variable. So yes, maybe $3.99 is the best purchase point, but there's a separate question of like, what is the value of that? What should you get for $3.99? So optimizing that as well. And then, yeah, beyond that, it mostly comes down to good UX. So how well are you presenting it? Like, your offer needs to look fantastic. Do not skimp on the money that you spend into making a really great modal that pops up. People have to love it. It has to be really high quality. It has to look like you care, makes you excited. Put some budget onto art, make it look fancy. Do not skip in that area. And then it's about what's in the bundle, what the purchase price of the bundle is, you know, the fun call to action things like 50% off, whatever. And then, yes, slapping a timer on it and making it readily available and visible to players as they go on.
I feel like a lot of offers that I see, they have the price as the button. Do you find that having purchase or buy now or something like that tends to do better as like a call to action, at least for this first time conversion event?
There may even be like a regulation on that these days. I think that's fair, but I probably wouldn't have just the price. I would probably, if you have to have just the price of the button for whatever reason, maybe even testing says is the best, put a call to action in the art. Get now or purchase now before it's too late. Something that's literally speaking to the player. Because you want them to feel prompted. You want them to understand that like you're supposed to press a button, because people do tend to shy away from just seeing prices themselves.
Cool. I like it. just like a few more questions, and I know we're almost out of time here already. We just talk about monetization for so long. Um, so thinking about ad monetization a little bit, just kind of like two questions. How can ad monetization tie into this idea of first time, player conversion slash, can prematurely showing ads actually impact your payer conversion and LTV?
Yeah, so there's a few different things there. So one, I'll make the distinction between interstitial ads that just pop up whether you like it or not, and ads
Mhm.
that you get to opt into, which can provide a bonus. Those are going to have different impacts. So yeah, so the first thing I'll say is yes, people are vastly more likely in most games to be willing to watch an ad than to actually spend. People are more free with their time than with their wallet. So there is some benefit, and especially it's why it's become such a popular model in recent years. Is because yes, you can offset the challenges of like a very complicated purchase flow or trying to convince someone to spend money with a much larger percentage of your audience being willing to just watch an ad for 30 seconds and get a cool bonus. So on that side, that's why it tends to have a strong benefit. Now, for how it can affect purchases, interstitials will definitely affect likelihood of purchases in one of two ways. One, a lot of people just see a game with interstitials and decide not to play. Like that is genuinely the problem that you have. It's like, you know,
It's
I'm
me.
guilty of, yeah, I can't stand it, right? I'm like, dude, just let me let me play the game or don't, or I'll force quit the ad. Like I will rage force quit and reopen an ad just so they don't get to show me the full ad, even if it takes approximately the same amount of time. Um, However, this works on both sides because then if you sell like a conversion pack that says no more ads, you have created essentially a tension point that you can remove with someone who spends. So a lot of games have like spenders lifetime have no ads, or buy the battle pass and you won't have to watch ads this month. So it is something that you can reverse leverage in a way, but it's not great because then your spending players aren't watching ads and they're the most valuable ones. So it's actually lowering the value of your players. And it's also kind of acknowledging that ads are a bad thing, which isn't really great. Like if you walked into a store and you had to like pay to not speak to someone or something. It's kind of like what it is. So it's weird to acknowledge that something in your game is such a bad experience that you're paying to remove it.
Yeah.
It's very strange negative reinforcement. So yeah, so it can work in both ways. Um, it can be valuable to offset revenue in general. It can provide a conversion point, but use it sparingly. Now in terms of like motivationally, if a game has ads, are you less likely to purchase? That's tricky. The thing I would really recommend anyone with an ad-based game is have two separate tracks. Your ads should do one thing and your purchases should do another thing, so that once you purchase, you're actually getting a different experience than you would have if you had to just watch an ad. And it shouldn't just be like, well, this is slightly stronger. It should have different functionality, so people know that they are buying something new and interesting, not just better ads, essentially.
Mm, that makes sense. Cool. How should this idea of spending actually impact session length? So you mentioned like after you spend, it should be glorious, it should be fun. Like, should that increase the length of your session for the next 3 days, for just this next time period, like, or should it not actually impact it at all, in the case of like a vanity purchase or something like that?
Yeah, as you say, I think there's going to be certain purchases that don't necessarily affect this. So you're getting into a gray area where it's like, well, will I be more likely to play longer if I look cooler? Maybe. Um, the thing that I think it's more strongly tied to is probably the nature of purchases, because one of the most common monetization relationships you're doing is pay versus wait. So, you encounter a timer. If you spend, you don't deal with that timer. You're low on resources, you buy the resources, you get to skip that way. Wherever those waits exist is the most common place for monetization to exist. So by its very nature, it's actually very hard to decouple spend and increased progression speed, and therefore session length. Because like,
Mm.
oh, I'm out of energy, I should be stopping, instead I'm spending. So it is something to be a little bit aware of, because not everyone's game is actually good for 3 hours straight, because they're not intended to be. Like, again, we fall into this thing that we talked briefly about last time, which is like you're making your game for the average player, and then it's the spender who's actually going through it. So from the spender standpoint, it's like, all right, well, this actually would have been fun and novel if I had have played it over a week, but instead I played for 3.5 hours. Now I'm through, I'm exhausted, I'm not excited by anything anymore. Maybe I've bought things that actually make my game kind of worse because, oh, I bought this cool sword and it meant that the 14 loot drops I just got in a row were useless because I bought the premium one. So it's a really dangerous thing to be aware of, is like, again, knowing what that best version of your game looks like. It might be better to sell something that makes rare loot drop than to sell rare loot, because then you're going to actually encourage them to play and keep getting all those great things that are part of your product. So you almost invariably extend session length and playtime, and you just have to be very aware of what that will actually do and how it could potentially compromise your core experience.
Cool. I have one last question, and that is related to Battle Pass, which has kind of, come about. So how can and maybe should the Battle Pass idea that lots of people are adding in actually tie into this idea of, first time payer conversion? Like, is that a good event that you should be targeting them to spend on because you should be getting a lot of value out of that? Or, just curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, so there's two things I think are really important to talk about with Battle Pass. One is that it's actually its strongest value right now is that people know what Battle Pass is. So again, if I go back to like, my big thing that I won't shut up about is actually understanding purchases. People feel like they understand Battle Pass from the get-go because it's in 600 games now, and that they associate it with high value. Like, I'll be honest, some of our games actually have higher conversion on Battle Pass than I would expect, simply because if a person opens up your game and see Battle Pass, it's the same as seeing a dragon. It just is a thing that most players understand now. So it is artificially inflated as a purchase point for a lot of people. So that's the thing to understand. But beyond that, in terms of how does it fit in, to me, Battle Pass is you leveraging your retention. And that's the thing that people really need to understand. If you have really crappy D30 retention, don't sell a Battle Pass because people are going to buy it once, and then it's just one bad purchase. Because the interesting thing about Battle Passes, one, in a lot of games that do it well, they reward retention. So, Clash Royale, it rewards and doubles or more than doubles the value of your playtime. I get 10 crowns and now I get twice the prizes or 5x the prizes, whatever that looks like. So it rewards people for playing longer. But also the nature of them is that they tend to do something like, well, a lot of people are like, okay, well, once a month I spend this amount of money, and that's going to be the thing. That's my one purchase, and it gives me enough currency, and this is how I use it. So it actually reduces the number of additional purchases a person is likely to make because they've already planned their spend. If their Battle Pass renews in a week, the likelihood of them spending in that week is drastically reduced, because why would they? They know that they have hard currency coming. So yeah, be aware that you're leveraging your retention, and you're also reducing the likelihood of certain other purchases. So it's an extremely powerful system because, yes, it also encourages retention. It gives you a reason to come back. It sets up, player behavior and habit, which are so powerful. But if your game doesn't last longer than 30 days, basically all you've done is ensure that they're only ever going to make one purchase, because why would they spend additionally after that? It's a very controlled purchase point as well, which is rough because it's like, if they're only ever going to spend once, they spend it on the $5.99 pack, not the $9.99 pack, and you can't really A/B test that very easily because so many people see it. So yeah, so it is a thing to not like overuse to some extent. Understand what you're trying to sell, what kind of game you're selling. If it's a game with a lot of retention, could be a powerful tool. From a conversion standpoint, it is artificially inflated by people understanding what it is, but it can definitely have some adverse consequences to your product if you're not fully aware of what you're doing with it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rimmy. I won't make you do a retention question and insight for each one of these parts, but it's been a pleasure having you on, and appreciate all your thoughts and insights.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.